had been looking forward to this moment all week long, the monthly labyrinth exploration. She needed this 45 minutes of calmness, tranquility, reflection. Sue knew that she could walk the labyrinth at any time or sit quietly with a lit candle, but she had such a hard time scheduling a spiritual practice. However, this monthly walk had become something that she was committed to and looked forward to. As she approached the labyrinth, she inhaled and exhaled, willing herself to focus on the moment. She sat on a nearby bench, listening to the harpist run her fingers over the strings. Members and friends of the congregation gathered around, and someone rang the bell. As the sound of the bell blended with the harpist music, people moved quietly to the entrance of the labyrinth. They entered one by one as they felt called. Sue waited. Some months she almost ran to the entrance. Other months she hesitated. And there was that one month when she'd been so preoccupied with her thoughts that she completely forgot to enter the labyrinth. As she began to rise and head to the labyrinth, she saw Maria out of the corner of her eye. Sue growled under her breath, "Oh, it figures Maria would be here. I just never get a second without her." Sue sat back down, not sure what to do. Maria approached the entrance to the labyrinth and entered, and Sue watched her go. Sue and Maria were both on the stewardship team. They both cared deeply for the congregation, and they both wanted to support a successful and generous pledge campaign this year. But they could not agree on how to raise the funds that were needed for the operating expenses of the substitutes for making a physical pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The symbolism and use of the labyrinth has shifted and changed over the decades. For some, the labyrinth may represent the hero's journey, down into the underworld and back again. For others, the labyrinth may be a meditation tool. For some, it might be a metaphor for life. Perhaps one's entire life could be perceived as a journey on a labyrinth. I seem to have a 10-year cycle in my life. Like a labyrinth, every 10 years or so, I take a significant turn in my life. As I approach the big turn, I rarely see it. I don't always see the turn in front of me, but the moment I enter the turn, I recognize it and wonder what is around the bend. 25 years ago, when I was 28 years old, I took a turn in the labyrinth of my life. I was planning to move to New York City, and as I packed up my apartment in Boston, I paused to read all of my journals and diaries. I started with entries from when I was about 8 years old and moved through my high school graduation at 18 and then through to 28 years old. As I got to know my childhood self, my teenage self, and my young adult self, I saw patterns and similarities. It seemed that I had been wrestling with the same issues, concerns, and questions all through my 28 years. The questions that I struggle with are questions like, who can I trust? Who will be my life partner? Do I want one? And how will I know? And what does it mean to live in this body in this time in history? What employment will both pay the bills in a capitalist society and provide some good in the world? I wonder what questions you grapple with. I wonder what you return to time and time again as you travel through the labyrinth of your lives. I was surprised to discover that the problems from my childhood were the same problems that I was dealing with in my young adulthood. The angst and urgency had changed, but they were basically the same. 10 years later, I took another turn in my life of the labyrinth as I prepared to move again, this time to California to begin seminary. I read my journals again. Though I had grown in emotional health and maturity with the help of a great therapist, I was still wrestling with the same questions, same issues, same concerns. This time, as I turned the pages, I tore out the sections of the awkward and anxious teenager, releasing her from my journals and releasing her from compartmentalized areas of my heart. I acknowledged her past suffering and welcomed her into my life and into my heart. In his book, Blue Highways, William Least Heat Moon recounts his travels around the United States. In the mid-1970s, Least Heat Moon met Kendrick Fritz, a student at Southern Utah State College. Fritz was studying to be a physician with plans to return to Arizona to work in a hospital in his native tribal lands. Fritz talked about the Hopi way with Least Heat Moon, and Least Heat Moon came to understand that emergence was an important aspect of the Hopi way. One day, Fritz showed Least Heat Moon an image meaning emergence. It is the same image that is on the cover of the order of service that you have. It is carved in a rock near a Hopi village in Arizona. European labyrinths are surprisingly similar to the Hopi emergence symbol and other symbols found across America. William Least Heat Moon writes, in regard to the emergence, its lines represent the course a person follows on their road of life. As they pass through birth and death and rebirth, Human existence is essentially a series of journeys, and the emergence symbol is a kind of map of the wandering soul, an image of a process. He continues, but also, like the Hopi symbols and ceremonies, a reminder of the cosmic patterns that all human beings move in. Again, human existence is essentially a series of journeys, and the emergence symbol is a kind of map of the wandering soul, an image of a process, a map of the wandering soul. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge that the Hopi emergence symbol and the labyrinth evolved within the context of very different cultures. These two symbols, the labyrinth and the emergence symbol, seem to have merged in our American culture over the centuries. For example, the image on the order of service is called a classical labyrinth. It comes up when you search the internet for labyrinths. However, it is also printed in William Least Heath's Moon, Blue Highways, as the Hopi symbol of emergence. These symbols have become conflated and possibly have shifted their original understandings, meanings, metaphors, and purposes. That said, the journey, the image of the journey that moves in and among and around and doubles back on itself, is a map of the wandering soul or the life journey that rings true for me. Carl Jung discusses the journey through the labyrinth in his stages of life. He writes, "When we must deal with problems, we instinctively resist trying the way that leads through obscurity and darkness. We wish to hear only of unequivocal results and completely forget that these results can only be brought about when we have ventured into the darkness and emerge again." He continues, "But to penetrate the darkness, we must summon all the powers of enlightenment that consciousness can offer." And Jung concludes, "The serious problems in life are never fully solved. If ever they should appear to be so, it is a sure sign that something has been lost. The meaning and purpose of a problem seem to lie not in its solution, but in our working at it continuously." I have been working at understanding the meaning of my life, well, for my entire life. I've been working at understanding the turns of the labyrinth, and I wonder if you search for meaning in your lives. I wonder if you contemplate the labyrinth of your life. Perhaps in some ways, whether we search for meaning or not, we all journey the labyrinth of our lives, turning and doubling back on ourselves. However, sometimes it is true we might not want to continue the journey. We might be going through a hard time in our lives, or we think we know how it all ends. Or we might want to force the outcome of the journey. We might want to reach the end already and achieve the goal, whatever the goal is. When we feel this way, we may be less able to consider that the journey itself matters. It is within the journey that growth can happen, reflection can happen, that transformation can happen. When we enter the labyrinth, the journey goes back and forth, around and around. We breathe in and out. The journey does matter. Sue entered the labyrinth. She moved around the circle. She inhaled slow and easy breaths as she moved. She counted. She tried to focus on the sounds of the harp, But she could not stop thinking about every tense conversation that she and Maria had had over the past few months. As she neared Maria going in the other direction, she glowered at her feet, sending angry thoughts to her nemesis. Another turn of the labyrinth passed under Sue as she moved toward the center. She glanced up at Maria across the labyrinth, making her own journey towards the center. And then Sue realized that they were both traveling to the same place, but from different directions. It was one of those moments when one's perception changes in a flash. Her anger and frustration evaporated. The next time that Sue and Maria passed on the labyrinth, Sue placed her hand on her heart and whispered under her breath, "I am sorry, my friend." Both continued to the center and back out again. When Sue exited the labyrinth, she exited as a different person than the one who had entered. When I arrived here in Oneonta 3 years ago, I was just a bit into another 10-year circuit of the labyrinth of my life. As I was unpacking my boxes and preparing to begin my transitional ministry with all of you, I wondered what it would be like to get rid of my journals and my diaries. I'd been dragging them around for 50 years. Did I really need to drag them around for the next 20, 30, 40 or so years? No, I decided I did not. I wanted to burn them in some sort of ceremonial fire. But honestly, I didn't feel like figuring out the logistics of burning in a safe place in this new city that I had moved to. I just wanted to let the journals go. So I did the next best thing. I loaded a box of journals into my car, drove down to the transfer station, paid $1 at the gate, parked my car, and heaved the box into the dumpster. I brushed off my hands, and that was that. One more turn on my journey. Perhaps my lifelong questions and worries and concerns could now be viewed through different eyes as I continue on my life's journey. Perhaps now, instead of reviewing my past through each turn on the labyrinth, perhaps I could be present to the journey itself. Perhaps the journey would change me, because the journey changes us. The journey matters. Comic book writer and author Cami Garcia writes, "That's the thing about a hero's journey. You might not start out a hero, and you might not even come back that way, but you change, which is the same as everything changing. The journey changes you, whether or not you want it to, and whether or not you recognize it. May we always remember that the journey matters, because the journey changes us, whether or not we know it, and whether or not we want it to. The journey matters." Blessed be, and amen.